Okay, so if you were at home and you weren't with us today, this is your bell work for today. It's a review of segment and angle bisectors. So please pause the video, copy down your problems onto a separate sheet of paper, and then we'll go over it when you're done. Okay, so this is a review from last week. Again, these little tick marks right here mean that the angles are congruent to each other. So your equation should be set up like this. 5x plus 8 must equal 8x plus 2. And then you could solve your equation from there. And I think the answer ends up being x equals 2. So you can check your work and make sure you got the correct answer. Again, if two segments or two angles are equal to each other, this ray in the middle that is actually cutting the larger angle in half is called an angle bisector. Review from last week. Okay, so problem number 2, my angles are equal to each other again, except this time I have to set up my problem a little differently because I'm missing a piece of information here. I don't know what that is. Well, actually, I do know what that is, because if this one is 2x plus 3, then this one also has to be 2x plus 3. So I need minus 3 plus 2x minus 3 has to equal 5x minus 9. So that's how your equation should be set up, and when you go ahead and solve for it, your answer comes out to be x equals 3. So go ahead and solve and check your work. Make sure you come up with the same answer I do. All right, the markings again here. I indicate that each of those line segments is equal, which makes this guy a segment bisector. Which also means that this point right here is the midpoint. Okay, so a lot of stuff comes out of a segment bisector there. It also means that these two things are equal to each other. This line segment and this line segment must be equal to each other. So that's how you set up your equation. 12x plus 8 is equal to 15x minus 1. And again, I think your answer is going to be 3 for this one. So do your math and check your work. Okay, so we are going to be having a unit test this coming Friday. Please pause the video and copy down the Quizlet website link. I have taken some time over the weekend to create a flashcard system for you to study for the test, so pause the video and go ahead and write that down, someplace where you won't forget it. Okay, so when you open up the Quizlet website, you want to go here where it says flashcards. And I've set up a total of 35 flashcards so far. So you can read the flashcard, and you're going to click down here in the lower right corner, and it'll flip the flashcard upside down so that you have two sides that you can look at. Okay, so strongly encourage you to go through all of these images and definitions and get accustomed with them so that you'll be successful on your test on Friday. All right, take a minute to pause the video and please write down your table of contents and then fill in the next page of your notebook. All right, so we have a couple of vocabulary words that may or may not be new to you, so please, this is your vocabulary. You'll have 3 or 4 vocabulary words for today, so these are the first 3 actually: complementary, supplementary, angles, and linear pair. So copy these notes in your notebook. Okay, so complementary angle from the page before says that angles that are complementary have to add to 90 degrees. I want to take a second because I know a lot of people struggle with, we're trying to remember what are complementary and what are supplementary. So I have a little visual that I like to share with my students that I'm going to share with you. So here we go. Complementary makes a corner. All right, so if I have complementary angles, they make a corner and they are also a right angle. Supplementary makes a line. Okay? Supplementary angles have to add to 180 degrees. So these complementaries are 90, supplementaries are 180. Okay, so keeping that in mind, go ahead and pause the video, and this is saying the angles are complementary, which means that the angles have to add up to 90 degrees. So if my first angle is 23, you can subtract 23 from 90 to figure out what the measure of the angle 2 is. So go ahead and do those 3 exercises, and then come back and check your answers. Okay, so there's your 3 answers. Check your work, and then move on. Now I've got supplementary angles. So my supplementary, I know, makes 180 degrees. So the measure of angle 1 is 23. If I'm going to find the measure of angle 2, I have to subtract 23 from 180, which would then tell me that my measure of angle 2 is 157. So go ahead and do the other 2 angles, and then come back and check your answers. Okay, so your next answers are 69 and 112. Make sure that you got the correct answer before you move on. First example says that angle A and angle B are complementary. So complementary corner, that tells me I'm going to have a 90-degree angle. And then I've got 2 angles that are going to be adding up to 90 degrees. So the measure of angle A, let's call this angle A, is going to be 5x plus 8. And the measure of angle B, let's call this guy angle B, is x plus 4. So my angle addition postulates, same thing as we were doing yesterday or on Friday. I have 2 little angles that add to 1 big angle, except that my big angle this time is equal to 90 degrees. So my equation is going to say x plus 4 plus 5x plus 8 has to equal 90 degrees. Complementary means 90 degrees. Okay, so then just go ahead and combine your like terms, just like you always would. That's going to give me 6x plus 12 equals 90. 6x equals 78. And x is going to be equal 13. Okay, and then if the question is actually asking me to find the measure of angle B, and I'm sorry, angle A and angle B. That means I have to plug it in. So I'm going to take 13 and plug it in for x. 13 plus 4 gives me 17. And then I have to take 13 and plug it in for this x. So 5 times 13 is 65 plus 8, which is 73. And if I did everything correctly, 17 plus 73 should be 90, and it is 90. Check. All right, so it should add up to 90 degrees. Similar situation, A and B are now supplementary, which means they make a line. Supplementary makes a 180 degrees line. So I'm going to draw my little 180 degree angle. And then I'm going to have a ray coming out, something like that. So I'm going to call this guy angle A. doesn't really matter which one you call A or B. You can pick them in any order. So I'm going to call angle A 3x, and I'm going to call this guy angle B, which is x plus 8. So this guy, the x plus 8 plus 3x, has to equal 180 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and combine my like terms right now. That's going to give me 4x plus 8 equals 180. 4x equals 172. And x ends up being 30, I'm sorry, not 30, 43. And then, of course, you can go back and plug it back in. So it says find the measure of angle A. So that's going to be 43 plus 8, which is 51. And 43 times 3, if I plug it in here, 43 times 3 is 129. And when I add 51, and 129, I get 180. So I did everything correctly. Okay, new vocabulary word. This is one of those important ones that you're going to see for the rest of the year. So take a minute and write down in your notes the definition and the diagram. Okay, so take a minute and identify vertical angles and all of the linear pairs. I guess I kind of didn't talk enough about linear pairs. Linear pairs and supplementary angles are the same. Linear pair makes a line, just like supplementary angles do. They're both equal to 180 degrees. Okay, so take a minute and see if you can name the two pairs of vertical angles, and name two pairs also of linear pairs. There's a lot of linear pairs up there. There's actually 4 linear pairs up there, but you only need to write 2. So pause the video and see what you come up with. All right, so my vertical angles are the guys that are opposite each other. So angles 7 and 9 are vertical angles. These angles are also opposite each other, so they are also vertical angles. My linear pairs are the ones that add up to 180 or make a straight line. So that's a linear pair. That's a linear pair. That's a linear pair. And that's a linear pair. So I actually have 4 instances of linear pairs up there. So you could have chosen any one of those 4. I'm just going to give you a couple examples to put in your notes. So 7 and 8 are linear pairs, and so are 8 and 9. Well, let's just put them all on there. 6 and 9 are linear pairs, and 6 and 7 are linear pairs. All right, use the figure at the right to answer each question. So the measure of angle 3 is 100. Then what does the measure of angle 4 have to be? Well, I know that the whole thing has to add to 180. So 180 minus 100 means that this guy is equal to 8. Okay? If the measure of angle 4 is 48, and the measure of, then I need to find the measure of angle 2. Well, these two angles are vertical angles, which means they have to be congruent. So if this one is 48, that means this one is also 48. Last question, if the measure of angle 2 is 40, then the measure of angle 1 is, so if this one is 40, looking for this one, they are a linear pair, which means they add to 180. So 180 minus 40 equals 140. So this one is 140 degrees. I guess I should be writing my little degrees on everyone. Okay, so this thing is a big hot mess. the main thing you want to keep in mind when you're trying to solve something like this is you cannot have both x's and y's when you set up your equation. You can only have x's, or you could only have y's. So here's your strategy. You need to locate, okay, pick one that you want to solve for first. Do you want to solve for x first, or do you want to solve for y first? It really doesn't matter which one you pick, it's just your preference. So I like to go with x personally because x comes before y in the alphabet. It just makes more sense to me. So I'm going to focus on my two angles that have x's in their measures. Okay, so these are the two guys that have x's in their measures. Now I want to determine the relationship between those angles. For example, are they complementary? Are they supplementary? Are they vertical angles? Well, if you remember from your notes, this makes a straight line, which means they have to add to 180 degrees. So that means that this guy plus this guy has to equal 180 degrees. So 4x plus 15 plus 5x plus 30 has to equal 180. Okay, combining like terms, that will give me 9x plus 45 equals 180. Subtracting 45 from both sides, I get 9x equals 135. And dividing both sides by 9, I think I get 15. Yep, 15. Okay, so then I could go back and take my 15 and plug it in for x. So I'm going to take this and take it and plug it in for x here and here to figure out what the measure of each of those angles are. So 4 times 15 is 60 plus 15 is 75, so that angle is 75. On this side, 5 times 15 is 75 plus 30, so that comes out to be 105. And when I add these two together, I do get 180. Okay, so x is equal to 5, or x was equal to 5 for the x part. Then I'm going to do the same thing for my y. So now I'm going to consider the two angles that have y's in them, and that would be the other two, which are these two guys. Probably should have used a different color for that, but you get the idea. Let's do this. Okay, so I'm talking about these two angles now. These are my two angles that have the y in it. So you can probably figure out from the example above that you would have to set those two equal to adding the sum of them has to equal 180. Okay, and then you could do the math and solve for y and plug it in to find the angle measure. Okay, last one. So this one, very similar. Again, you can only have x's or y's. You cannot have both letters in your equation. So I'm going to start with my x's because I can see that this angle right here has an x in its measure, and this guy here also has an x in its measure. So I need to determine what's the relationship between those two angles. Well, from your notes, if the angles are opposite each other, which these are, they are called vertical angles. And the definition of vertical angles says that they are congruent or equal to each other. And if you look at the diagram, you can kind of tell that they're equal to each other. So that's kind of a common sense thing. All right, so my equation for this one is going to look like this. If I subtract 4x from both sides, that's going to give me 2x equals 16, and x is equal to 8. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to plug in 8 for x. So 6 times 8, that's going to give me 48 here. And since these two green angles that I've labeled on here are congruent, I can also assume that this is 48. You should, or you could prove it by plugging 8 in for x here. So 4 times 8 plus 16 does actually give you 48. 32 plus 16 is 48. All right, so now I need to figure out how am I going to solve for y. Well, if this angle is 48, and that whole angle, because this is a line, that whole angle has to be 180 degrees. I could say, well, then this angle must be 180 minus 48, which is 132. So then 11y has to be equal to 132. 11y equals 132. Y is going to be 12. All right, that concludes today's lesson. Make sure you get your homework done on a separate sheet of paper, which can be found, the homework can be found on the website also. Hope you feel better, and we'll see you tomorrow.